Go ahead. Look at that. Yeah. That's a nice production value, everyone. So, yeah. Well, we're not officially begun yet, so we're going to wait a few minutes before we bring Hazel in, say hi to people. Just getting live now so that we're ready for right at noon. So this is, I've got a borrowed setup, a member of Chocolate Society and friend of several years, Minnie. I don't know the crossover between several and many. Somewhere in there, Jordan, Augustine is helping me out. Brought in a much nicer camera, as you can probably tell, and got some better lighting and such, and rearranged the room a bit. So, yeah, and then I've got a new mixing console, so I can play ridiculous sound effects like this one. Yeah. Whenever the need should arise, I can do bad rim shots. At some point, I'll get my like podcast sounds put in there, and I can do audio for a podcast right as we're going live. I just haven't figured that out yet. So, let's see. I'm hoping the levels are good. We've got our first viewer. Excellent. So I've got Carrie in here being the producer. Jordan is the director. We're going to all have real titles, guys. And I'm the idiot on camera. It's good. How are you for level? For monitors? Can you hear all right?
It's a little low.
Okay. What about now? Is that much better?
Getting better. Little higher.
Okay. How about this?
That's good.
Good? Okay. And then Carrie, can you hear all right? I'm talking. Check. Okay. That's good. Yeah, if you guys need me to change your levels at any point, just mime at me.
Okay. Checking the levels on that are recording that can't.
Yeah, that's pretty good. This has got my mixer as a limiter, so we should protect people from getting their ears blown out with a good plosive. Because I don't have my pop filter today. Because it's big and annoying. It's fun pretending that I'm an audio guy. Yeah, let's close the door. So, yeah, I hope people get to enjoy hearing from Hazel. She's got so many cool stories and a lot of cool perspective in the chocolate world. So we'll be talking a bit about some of her background and some of what she's been doing more recently. This is where I need like a good background in music for the future. Right? Well, or the video. I'll have to have a video montage to begin my live streams. Where are we at on time? Nearly there. Wet my whistle a little bit more. You can see my over my right shoulder here, my open reel tape deck that is pretty. And that's usually about as far as its functionality goes right now. It does work, but I haven't hooked it up in a long time, which is a shame. All right, I think we are at noon. Let's go live.
We are live.
All right, well, liver. Let's go ahead and bring in Hazel Lee, who, let me make sure I've got her volume going up here. So, everyone, I'd like to introduce Hazel Lee from London. She's the creator of Taste with Color, the tasting map, which we will be talking a bit about today. I have a giant one. She's also quite the enthusiastic chocolate traveler. She's done a lot of blogging about her exploits and visiting countries all over the world. She's done a lot of interesting experiments making chocolate, and we'll talk a little bit about some of those because some of them are really interesting. She has a background in food science, so her approach to chocolate is it kind of comes because she's really into art and the science side. So it's this really exciting and unique melding of these approaches. So, Hazel, welcome.
Thanks.
How are you today? Your day's like almost
It's
over.
yeah, I'm used to talking with America, so it's all good. Yeah, it's 7 p.m. here. It's still light just.
Just
So,
we I
yeah,
think we may
sunset
have
will
blue
be
skies.
happening soon.
Nice.
Say that again.
We actually have some blue skies. I think we're supposed to get stormed on later
Nice.
today. We had some earlier, but welcome. We I think with the different lighting, it's hard to tell, but I think our walls are actually very similar in color. So
Do they look similar side by side on the screen?
they don't right now. Mine looks a bit more green on my camera, but it's a deep teal, and then yours looks quite blue. So it's all good.
Yeah, it does look a bit more blue, I think. Yeah.
Well,
It's called turquoise copper.
turquoise copper. That's the best turquoise, probably.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit. We met a few years back at one of the Northwest Chocolate Festivals, and you were a bit of a celebrity walking around. Everyone wanted to take pictures with you and such.
That was a fun encounter, our first meeting.
We got interrupted a lot by people walking up like, "Hey, can I get a picture?" And I was like, "Oh, Hazel, she's so famous." What is it that you do that brings your name and face to people?
I think it's just my passion for chocolate in general. Yeah. And I think I perhaps came into the world of craft chocolate through social media at a time when perhaps there weren't loads of people talking about it. There were quite a few, but not loads. I'm not hugely active on social media, at least in the last kind of couple of years, because of obviously there's not been a huge amount going on,
Right. Ugh.
sadly.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I was just really passionate and I threw myself into it. I went to lots of events, I met people, I would Instagram a lot. And then I just started meeting people at events. And I think I just, yeah, very passionate and very excited
Right. Yeah. You're a
to
bit of
meet
a
lots of makers and
yeah. You're a bit of a networking natural, I'd say. You've gotten involved with
yeah,
judging competitions in a variety of places, right? How many places have you
yeah.
judged chocolate competitions?
Um, I'm not sure. I have done it for Brazil a few times, and actually, when I went to Brazil as well for an awards called Premio Bintabar Brazil, um, and Zelia, who runs it, had shipped the boxes over to London previously, but I went there in 2019, I think. Um, I've lost the concept of time because of COVID a little bit. Um, and then I have done them for some awards in the Dominican Republic that were sent here, and for the Academy of Chocolate a few times, for quite a few years actually, and then for the Northwest Chocolate Awards a couple of times when they were shipping them over prior to going over there.
I mean, I'm counting three continents there.
And
That's
maybe some others. Yeah.
that's actually really awesome. I mean, that's you've gotten to do a lot of travels. I mean, how many countries do you think you visited for chocolate related stuff?
I think I counted a while ago, it might have been about eight.
Okay. So, and that includes the farms you've been to?
Some countries I've seen a few farms, so that's the number of countries that I've visited, but visited cocoa farms there.
Okay. And then
So I've seen cocoa farms in 7 or 8 different countries, but
Okay.
usually more than one.
Wow. So let's go back a little bit to your initial discovery of fine chocolate. Um, at this point, you were already done with university. Is that right? Were you already a food scientist
No,
at this
it
point?
was not quite actually.
Okay.
So I was always interested in chocolate. It was always in the background. And then I went into a hotel chocolat store, and they have a huge variety of different chocolates. They do have some bean to bar as well, but I tasted one of their rum and raisin chocolates. It was like a rum soaked raisin coated in chocolate, and it just
Mm.
tasted so different from the typical chocolate that you'd get from your what we'd call a newsagent. So I'm not sure the American seem to
I
have
mean,
thrown you.
newsagent sounds like
You're
someone
normally
reading
really
the
good
news.
with like all these British terms.
It's not the one
Your
that shows
corner
up in Harry
store.
Potter. Oh,
Your
okay.
corner store.
Yeah, I don't think they said
Yeah.
newsagent in Harry Potter, so I'm
Yeah. all,
okay.
all
So,
out of vocab.
so you're
Yeah.
just
So,
average grocery store
your
chocolate,
big brands and stuff.
right? Okay. So when
Yeah.
you found that, what made the jump into looking for more of that, and how did you begin finding fine chocolate after that?
Yeah, so that's when I first tasted chocolate and realized, it's very different from your typical mass produced bars from a local newsagent. Um,
Got a new one.
you're going to try and weave that in to future conversations. I can
Yes,
see it happening already.
definitely.
Um, and actually, I became a huge fan of Hotel Chocolat, and I worked for them while I was studying.
Oh, okay.
And then I actually applied for a job there just after I graduated, but it was in operations, and I knew I wanted to work in product development. And even the guy that interviewed me could see that, but that wasn't the role
Okay.
that was available at the. So I ended up working for a food consultancy business that had their own chocolate lab.
Okay.
So I thought that's great. It's a great place to start my career because I would work with all different types of foods across the industry, from startup to all the big brands.
Sure.
And they had a chocolate lab as well, and they would do training courses. And so I helped prepare chocolate training courses and confectionery and other stuff like fats and oils and things like that. So it
What
was
what do you mean by chocolate training course?
more for industry professionals. So it
Okay.
would be an overview of where it comes from,
Okay.
all the equipment, and then we would learn about tempering and truffles, and would learn about bloom and fat bloom and sugar bloom, and do a few practical sessions and visit a local chocolate producer who was a chocolatier.
Okay. So you got into the technical
Um,
side really soon, really early on.
yeah, yes, but at a small level because I was working with a huge variety of foods in that role. But part of that role as well was I was a new product development scientist, so I worked on multiple um, product development projects for a huge variety of different clients. But part of the role was also helping prepare for our open days, and my favourite part was to create the new product exhibition.
Okay.
So I would go to these various food shows, a bit like the fancy food show. I'm sure you've got different ones.
Sure.
Um, and I would go and try and get loads of samples of all the really cool, exciting stuff, and I would email people and get samples. And whenever I went to these shows, I'd always gravitate towards the chocolate.
Sure.
So I got really excited. I remember there was one with a chocolate where they would put Bombay mix with it. Do you know Bombay mix?
No.
Another new thing.
Is it a spice thing?
Yeah, it's like a spicy Indian snack
Oh, okay.
that's savory.
A
So it
safe.
was quite unusual to find chocolate bars with Bombay mix,
Oh,
you
okay.
know.
Yeah. That
Yeah.
I grew up with Mexican treats and stuff. So like having a chili and mango lollipop that's like that was my childhood, you know.
Yeah.
And eating pickle salt, which that was a thing, and people were all about it when I was a kid. So we didn't have a lot of Indian snacks that I was super familiar with. So that's really fascinating. So that was mixed in with the chocolate. How did that?
Yeah, like as an inclusion
Oh,
and
okay,
robed.
interesting. How'd you like it?
Yeah, with different flavors. I thought it was great. And so at the beginning, I was really excited about unusual flavor combinations. So things like that really stood out to me and were
Sure.
great for the new product exhibition that I was, curating
Right.
for our open days. And then I'd find, chocolates that had all these different types of mushrooms with like health properties and things like that
Right.
that were based in Spain. And I was really interested in chocolate with Marmite and blue cheese. And yeah, so I was quite interested at the beginning more of the crazy and unusual flavor combinations because my passion for food came from Heston Blumenthal. Have you heard of him?
No, not that I remember at least. It
Yeah,
sounds
so he's like a food scientist chef,
okay.
and he would pair foods through their chemical similarities.
Okay.
So he would kind of analyze various foods
Right.
and pair them according to similarities of like the chemicals that you would find. So like the natural flavors you would find. So he put together salmon and licorice, for example, that you wouldn't typically think of putting together.
Hmm. Yep, I would not think of that still. That doesn't sound appealing, but well, I don't know. I would try just about anything once. I have learned that I won't try everything once. There are things that I won't try that are scary. But yeah, I think
Yeah,
I
and some
encountered
things
that
don't
guy.
work with chocolate as well. So, I've tried chocolates with caramelized onion and
Mm.
garlic, uh,
Have you ever had one with
but
truffle?
which doesn't work.
Have you had a truffle?
Um, I think I've had truffle flavored chocolate before.
I've
Yeah.
I had
Is that what you
a
mean?
bonbon, right? Yeah, bonbon with the ganache inside had black truffle, and it was intense. And
Hmm.
I don't think I was prepared for that kind of experience. It was crazy. That chocolatier, he actually makes some amazing flavors. My wife's favorite is was it sweet corn? He did a sweet corn truffle bonbon, and it was amazing. My favorite one that wasn't with some kind of nut was ruby red grapefruit, which
Okay.
apparently is one of the things that I didn't know was a Texan thing. But ruby red grapefruits are usually from Texas,
Okay.
and they're a lot sweeter than normal grapefruit, and that was incredible. It was so good. So yeah, the flavor mixes are really interesting. So what was kind
And
of
I'm
the
still interested. I'm still interested
in the
in that. And I
flavors?
love that people can really tell a story with a chocolate bar, with inclusions,
Sure.
and they can bring flavors to you that you wouldn't normally try, like the coupe for
Right.
example. That totally blew my mind. It still does. And I tasted candied Courvoisier pulp in Arcelia's bar, Mission Chocolate,
Right.
and that flavor blew my mind. And that's really exciting. And Arcelia makes a lot of bars with ingredients from Brazil that you wouldn't get outside of Brazil.
Mm, okay.
So it's a real introduction to Brazil, and I find that really interesting. And I'd like to spend more time experimenting with flavors. I really want to make a mole flavored bar. And I
Mm.
still have, a batch of Mexican in my grinder that I made a year ago.
It's still in there?
So I know.
How do you get it out
But I
after a
mean, it's
year?
safe in there.
Sure, but how do you get it out? You just put it in the oven?
So, yeah, I would put it in the oven at 50°C
Okay.
and, or some people have had bad experiences with that. I have as well. That was an accident. We won't go into that now, but Most people use a hairdryer,
I
but
guess
it's
that
quite
is.
tedious to do that.
How many pounds or kilos would you say are in there?
Maybe 3.5 kilos.
Whew.
It's
Yeah,
pretty full.
that would take a while to melt the hair dryer.
Yeah,
That
I
being
know, and
said, it's
it's
an
not ideal,
indispensable
but
tool.
it's just experimentation,
Sure.
and I, you know, I haven't because of COVID. So I used to rent somewhere, and I didn't have space for all of my equipment, so I would use my mum's house as a chocolate factory,
Good.
and I would set up everything, take over her place basically, and make some chocolate. And I would then leave it running, and then she would send me video updates and tell, like, press turn it on and off and stuff.
What did she think of the
And she
sound?
knows I'm. Oh, the sound is actually quite. You get used to it because it's just a continuous hum, but it's also I've heard of other people again having bad experiences with it constantly running, and yeah, so um, I think it's safer to turn it off at night if you can. But obviously, it was, yeah, I would kind of go to my mum's for a weekend and spend ages kind of doing the test roast and roasting and then letting it cool and cracking it and then, winnowing it, and then eventually get it into the grinder late on a Sunday night and then just leave it running. And then I would ask my mum to turn it off in a couple of days' time.
Nice.
And then
Katie,
it would set, and then I would have to, melt it. And then the next time I went to hers, I'd have to melt it. But obviously, because of COVID, I didn't go there.
right.
And then I bought my own place 6 months ago, and so my mum chucked everything in a van and dropped it off here. But I've obviously been very busy doing higher priority things, so I still
Sure.
got my grinder just full of chocolate.
Well, Katie, from Kindred Soul Art, she says that it's just aged, so it was all deliberate.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's
Purposefully
grinder
aged in the
aged.
grinder.
Yeah, grinder aged and home to home. So
I
it'll
wonder if that would actually appeal on a label. Grinder aged. I don't think so.
it's like, yeah, we turned off the power and left it for
For a
flavor.
year.
I mean, it's all just for the flavors,
That
obviously.
stone flavor. But yeah.
Have you had I'd like to talk about some of your experiments because those that have followed your Instagram have seen the disco bar, which you and I have
Hmm.
discussed was a really exciting project you did. Why don't you talk a little bit about what that is and why you thought to do it?
Yeah, I am proud of the disco bar, and I think you tasted a disco bar. Was it
India.
the Thai one? Oh, it's the Indian one.
Yeah.
Okay, I did like two experiments.
I never
So
tried the Thai one.
what? Yeah, what did you have it?
Not the Thai. You gave me one of the India ones.
Oh yeah, yeah, and then I made another batch with cafe lime leaves to infuse the sugar. But
Interesting.
anyway, so I was really curious about. There's lots of deconstructed bars, and that's quite an overused, probably very old school term for kind of chefs and desserts and things like that.
Right.
Um, and I really love Chocolate Tree, so Ali Gower and Freddie. I love their bar, I love their Mexican bar, where they've actually, so typically, for those that don't know, Mexican chocolate is kind of roughly made, the kind of Taza style. Um, but what Ali and Freddie did was they made a very silky chocolate, and then they blended it with nibs and sugar for the texture. And as I was eating it, I could feel the silky chocolate. So it wasn't this kind of rough ground, powdery kind of texture.
Sure.
You had the silky chocolate blended with the crunchy nibs and the crunchy sugar. And I thought that's really clever.
Yeah.
But why's nobody put it on the top? And at the time, I was working for a sugar company, And there's lots of technical terms used and measurements. And there was some project where they were somehow trying to measure the shininess of crystals.
Okay.
And so internally in the company, I hunted down like the shiniest sugar I could find.
Okay.
And I got this kilo, and I sort of wish I'd taken it now when I left, but I got this kilo of shiny sugar. And I decided to, inspired by Ali and Freddie's bar, to make that sort of style where you've got the really silky chocolate. So I made 100% that was very silky, and then put the sparkly sugar on the back.
So,
so it looks really cool.
and the ratio is basically what the ratio end up being.
Yeah, so it was a little bit tricky to actually measure it. I thought it might have been an 80 or a 90%, but obviously you can weigh how much sugar you put on,
Right.
but then some of it comes off because not all of it's stuck. So
Right.
it's a bit tricky, but it was probably about a 90% or something like that.
Okay.
And it was also kind of fun because you could play with it. You could try it with the sugar side down and then with the chocolate side down.
Right.
And it would be a different experience. And I'm really quite a texture snob. I know that some people prefer that slightly rougher grind. Not you, I guess.
No.
I just personally, like, I know some people like it, unless it's intentional
Right.
and you want that cookie texture. I just think, why don't you make it smooth? Because you can. Like, I bought a grinder on Amazon. I can make it smooth at home. It's easy to do it. But some people prefer that texture, and I appreciate it's, chocolate is an art and a science, and it's an expression of the maker and what they want to do. But I really like the silky texture, and obviously there's a whole spectrum of like where it can get really excessively kind of slimy, like a lot of French chocolates. But generally, I like a smooth and creamy texture.
Sure.
And then you can feel the kind of crunchy of the sugar, because you really use sugar so much for texture when you can.
Right.
Like a crunchy demerara.
Yeah.
And that's not really played with that much in the chocolate
It really
world.
isn't. Can I tell you what experience just seeing that bar brought to my mind?
Yeah.
Years and years ago, probably in the first year or two of Chocolate Society, I went and grabbed from the shelves at Caputo's what I thought was a 70% blend from a certain Italian company. But what was in the spot, what should have been a 70%, was 100% of the same blend.
Uh-huh.
And this was a good object lesson to distinguish for me the difference between smelling and tasting, because when you smell it, you don't smell sweet. You smell things that make you think of sweet, like chocolate. And I was like, oh, here it is. I'm ready for this. And we passed around the little bowl of chocolate, and it gets several people down before I actually decide to pop it in. And immediately I'm like, I've made a mistake, because I'm not a 100% person. And several people were like gagging and like, faces turning red. People were not fans. And being at a restaurant and store, there are the little packets of sugar and stuff. And I went and got a little sugar packet, poured it into my mouth on top of the melted chocolate, and instantly it made it good. And I was like, well, that's really
Wow,
wacky.
I've never heard anybody do that before. Like, oh, this 100% so intense. Someone get me sugar.
Yes, that's exactly what it
Most
was.
people just spit it out.
Yeah.
People spit it out.
Well,
That's
I'm always trying to experiment, even when I'm hating what's going on right now. But when I saw your bar and seeing what it was, I was looking at it and I was like, you basically made that experience in a single place. And like you said, you could play with it. And even that ratio of, say it was 85, 90%, that's overall. That's not locally. So if you just set it on your tongue and let it melt at 100%, it's 100%. Some of it you're swallowing. And by the time you actually get to the sugar, the ratio will have changed, and just moving it around in your mouth and things. So when I saw it, I was like, that's going to be a fun bar to eat, because every bite, every piece will be different. But then to your point, it still has that silky, finely ground cocoa in it. And the sugar, you picked a great sparkly batch because it was so shiny. It looked like jewels sitting on top there. So,
Yeah, I just think it's really fun as well, and it's, as you said, it's a whole experiment, and you experience the chocolate in many different ways. And I think the 100% is really intense, and I'm not a fan either. Generally, I've tasted the odd one that I think is amazing, but yeah, I'm not a huge fan. So I was thinking of repeating that experiment, but making perhaps a 95 or a 90, so that the 100% part's less intense
oh, so add a little sugar into the chocolate itself,
into the chocolate
and
itself.
then
Yeah.
okay.
So a bit like Ali did.
Oh,
Yeah.
right. Okay. Yeah, that would be fun. And you could even do it as like a demerara. I don't know how to say this word. It's not a word we use in America. I think we say turbinado usually. But
Yeah, it sounds familiar, that word. Yeah.
that's basically, it still has the
The larger
molasses, right?
crystals. Yeah.
Okay.
The
Yeah,
larger crystals that you'd normally use to sweeten your coffee.
sure. For people that drink coffee. No, it's
Yeah, sorry, you're not a coffee drinker, but yeah,
okay. Yeah, that'd be an interesting idea. I think if you were to make some more of that, I would want to try it. So consider what it would take to ship me some. Winter would be a great time. Can ship so
Yeah,
much
and
easier.
whenever I get that Mexican chocolate out the grinder.
Just you got to rig up a little fixture to blow the hair dryer on it for about a day and a half, and then it should be ready to go. Maybe a little time in the
Yeah.
oven.
But no, I would like to make a mole bar with that one day. I just obviously have a lot of other things to do that come before that. I have lots of stuff to get rid of before I actually have space to make the chocolate bars as well.
What other experimental bars have you done, and like what are some of your maybe nearer term plans for experimentation? What else have you thought about doing?
It's actually quite nice to talk about these ones that I've done because I hadn't even thought about it for so long, and it brings back the memory of actually it's a lot of fun. But as most people know, chocolate fans know, and makers, or just people in the industry, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to make chocolate, so it takes a long time.
Right.
But I'm hoping that because I will have everything here and I'll be here, it'll make it easier when I do it. So I normally start off with making, if I have a new bean, I'll just start off with a 70%, but then I like to experiment further with that. And everything's usually, as most creative projects are, they're inspired by something else. Creativity is just kind of combining ideas that you've seen in a new way. So I really love the Zotta bar that's the 70% milk without any added sugar.
Okay.
Have you had that before?
No.
So
Jordan
it's okay, cool. It's just cacao and milk powder, I think. And I think they do an 80 as well. But I really like the 70. And my dad remembers a chocolate a long time ago that was very creamy, but not very sweet.
Okay.
He doesn't like things too sweet. So I thought that's a great bar for him because it is very creamy, but it's not that sweet. You've obviously got a little bit of sweetness from the lactose.
Sure.
So it's not, completely unsweet, but it's really interesting. So I think I made one, and this was a long time ago, where I added 5% sugar.
Okay.
Because I wanted just a little bit more.
Right.
But I remember at the time I was making it, I didn't have any full fat milk powder, or like the one that I had expired, and you couldn't buy it in the shops. And so I got my brother to go out and get me some, and he could only find skim milk powder. So I then had to add some extra cocoa butter, but that obviously means that it's not going to be as soft as a dairy fat. So
Right.
it wasn't, it didn't come out exactly how I planned, but it was still really interesting. So rather than being, completely 100% without sugar, I had 5% sugar and I think 15% milk powder and then 80% cacao.
Okay.
And that cacao was a blend of butter and cocoa. And I did really like it, but it was quite drying,
Oh,
I think, because it just was low in the dairy fat.
right, right.
So
Interesting.
that was really interesting. And again, I'd like to learn, but obviously making a batch just takes a long time.
Sure. Have you played around at all with aging? Because that's something when you were
No,
talking about not liking 100%. I'm not sure if you've gotten to try much toac, but some of their aged
no, I haven't.
100% are. That's like when I say I don't like 100%, there's a little asterisk, except for some of the toac that I've tried because they've done some that are aged in some kind of like maybe a sherry barrel or something along those lines, and for 3 years, and it mellows out so much. It is evaporating a lot of the volatiles that give it its flavor. But at the end of that 3 years, it was so much gentler than other 100% that I've had, and it had just like these other lovely woody kind of characteristics that I was like, well, maybe I should buy barrels to stick chocolate in
Buy
for
some
three
bars
years
and
and
chuck them in there for a few
wonder
years.
for 3 years, like, is it still okay in there? So it was, I don't know that I'd have that kind of patience. I'm pretty sure I would not have that kind of patience, but it
Yeah.
was good.
Well,
So,
there is that trend, isn't there? The kind of whiskey barrels and things like that. And usually I've seen some people make it where they have just the broken pieces of the barrel in a
right,
box with the chocolate. They haven't just stuck bars in a barrel.
right.
But I
Yeah,
mean, it actually makes it better because you've got more surface area and everything.
sure. Just some of that could be the outside surface area, which you may or may not want.
Yeah.
Potato, potato. But in America, you see a lot of bourbon barrel aged ones because bourbon is a fairly big
Popular
deal.
drink.
Yeah, it's fairly popular in the states. Um, what other kinds of things have you been toying with trying to make yourself?
Well, what I would really like to do next is to make a mole bar.
And then
So,
what?
yeah,
How would you go about that?
so I've made mole in the so mole is the Mexican sort of chicken chocolate dish, to be very simply, and it has so many herbs and spices and chilies and seasonings that go into it. And I've made it the sort of very long-winded way before, and I've also made a cheats way. And to be honest, the cheats way is pretty good. So
Or you buy
I'm
pre-mixed?
quite happy with the cheats way.
Is
Where I
that
buy what? Sorry.
is that a pre-mixed set of spices and things, or what do you mean?
Oh no, no, I don't do that. I just would use. I've actually made what I really love, like a chicken mole pasta bake. Do you call them pasta bakes?
If it's a pasta bake, yes, but we'd say pasta
As
probably.
in a pasta bake?
Trying to say it the correct Italian way, of course, as we always do in
Yeah,
America. Pronounce things properly. Totally don't mispronounce French words on purpose. That would be rude of me.
exactly. Right. So yeah, I've made a chicken mole pasta bake
Mm,
where I just used chocolate and cheese, and I think I used a few different spices, cinnamon and black pepper, and maybe a couple of others, and some dried chilies, a few different dried chilies, and I just made like a sauce with that, and I used cocoa pasta and some roast chicken. I actually got the recipe I put on Instagram.
you have cocoa
So
pasta?
it's all details are there.
I want cocoa pasta. I don't think we have
I
that.
know.
Do we have that?
Hotel Chocolat used to sell it, and they don't anymore. And I'm quite sad because I've made it without the cocoa pasta, and it's just not the same.
All right, we got to make our own pasta.
Yeah.
Carrie's not super
To
excited
be
about
honest,
that.
it's not hard to make though, is it? It's not the hardest thing to make.
I never made it.
I haven't either, but I imagine it's not very hard.
I've heard it's not hard. Good, good. I like that.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
got a Billy Madison experience.
And then I top it off with some like crunchy nachos and more cheese, and yeah, it's still pretty
Interesting.
epic.
Yeah, that's a lot of. I mean, that's what mole is, right? It's a lot of flavors, and mole often has chocolate in it, and often peanut butter and
Yeah,
all these spices, peppers. So yeah, that'd be
peanuts, almonds. Yeah, I mean, there's probably loads of different recipes as well, but
sure.
it's about what I would be interested in is kind of if you had to really condense the ingredients list, what are the key contributing flavors? And I think it would be the kind of a form of nut, whether it was peanut or almond, um, cinnamon, maybe a couple of other spices, some of the dried chilies. Um, and then it's always usually served with some white sesame seeds on top. So I also quite like the idea of making it look like that. And I've seen some really, really creative bars from
Sure.
lots of different makers where, there was a nice kind of sweet corn bar inspired by the sweet corn that you get on the Mexican street. I think that was by Foxglove.
Would you want to like grind down the spices so the texture is not really perceptible, or would they be
Yeah,
on top, or how would
probably.
okay? And then some of the sugar maybe still leave as crystals. Add the sugar in
I
later.
don't know because that's not mole. That's Mexican bars, but it's not mole.
Okay.
It's like that's Mexican style chocolate, but it's not the mole experience,
So basically, you're talking make. This is what I'm hearing. It's like make a mole that's really heavy on cocoa, that basically you pour into a mold. I would eat that. I do
Yeah,
chocolate
just
snickerdoodle
brew the chocolate
cookies.
with some chicken.
Right. Would you actually do it with chicken? Would you make
No,
like
I
okay,
wouldn't.
you wouldn't
No,
add chicken?
no.
Carrie doesn't think that would be tasty apparently, based on facial expressions.
Do you know what I think would be really cool actually is to have some, like crispy chicken skin on top of the bar. Obviously, it wouldn't last very long, but I think that if you wanted to make like a chicken version, I think that would be really cool.
Interesting.
And I really like the idea of sweet and savory. If I
Yeah.
could, I would love to have like a brand that literally had my favorite just plain salted crisps, chips, covered
Thank you.
in like a really good chocolate
That
and
I've
just
I've
eat
seen
like
that, but
these
maybe not with like
crisps
the
dipped in
best
chocolate.
ones. But yeah, that's
Yeah.
dipping. Well, and actually, the I just did a brownie recipe recently, and the recipe video I was watching that kind of went along with the recipe, they were talking about you could cover it with pretzels or candy, and one of them was like crushed up potato crisps.
Yeah, I've seen that on a bar before, but obviously the shelf life's quite short if you do that.
Right, a lot shorter than chocolate itself, because chocolate's a miracle food and it lasts forever.
Yeah, and you can just chuck it in some barrels for years and it'll taste even better.
Right, you got to chuck it though.
Apparently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about. I kind of promised people trip stories,
Okay.
where you've been to so many different cacao plantations and multiple hemispheres,
A few
northern,
different,
southern,
yeah, a few
eastern, western.
continents.
Uh,
Yeah.
what kinds of things, especially in some of your earlier trips, what things stuck out to you that, like, or struck you? What are some of like the experiences that have really stayed with you?
I think the ones that stay with me more are the ones where I already have some sort of relationship with the cacao. So I visited farms that perhaps I knew through friends of friends, but I hadn't tasted chocolate with those beans. And so it's always magical to be surrounded by cocoa, and you're always in a beautiful tropical place anyway, usually. So yeah, there's definitely more excitement and more of just kind of a multi-dimensional experience when I've tasted the cocoa. So I mean, so many cocoa farms are so beautiful, and I always, I know so many people ask me like, "What's your favorite chocolate? What's the best chocolate?" I'm like, "Well, what's the best wine?"
Right.
It kind of, it's such a common question, and I get why people ask it, but it also drives me a bit crazy because I'm like, it's so personal.
Right.
What do you like? I don't have a favorite chocolate. I like to, I like variety. I always have. It depends on my mood and everything. But anyway, yeah, I do have some farms that stand out. So I really liked Animali in southern India.
Sure.
And for me, I'm this, I never know how to describe myself when people, we're at a dinner party and everyone's going around the table and sort of saying, "Oh, so what do you do?" And most of the people are like, "I have a chocolate business." And I'm like, "Well, I have a really small side business and I have a full-time job that's not chocolate, but sometimes I spend my time doing this, 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 this." And so I never really have like a proper hat. So I have lots of small hats, you
I
know.
I definitely do know.
Um, yeah. And so when I've gone on trips or visited cocoa farms, they've been for different reasons. So Grenada has a big piece of my heart as well, and I went to Grenada as a sort of blogger at the time because I had a lot going on my chocolate Instagram at that time. It was quite early before lots of other accounts got big. So I was there to kind of educate people and show people what's happening here and show people what was going on in Grenada. So that was the purpose of that visit. And, I made a lot of friends there and I love Grenada and I went there for a holiday just before the pandemic by myself because I wanted to go somewhere and where I knew people. And then I've gone to other farms just because I've been in that part of the world and I happened to meet somebody through Well Tempered or something because I thought, oh, I'm in Malaysia. Is there anybody who's got a cocoa farm?
Right.
And so I've ended up visiting a farm, but perhaps I don't know the cacao yet because I've not tasted it and things like that. But for the India trip, I spoke to the guys, Karthi and Manoj, quite early on when they were just starting to experiment with their cacao. And that's when I was experimenting quite early on as well. So I was really interested in trying new beans. I was still learning how to make chocolate. And they wanted some feedback from some European makers. And, I wasn't technically a chocolate maker. I was just a home hobbyist.
Right.
But they still reached out to me and I thought, yeah, I'd love to try cacao from India. And I remember when I got the documents, it was all written in the Indian text and in Tamil, I think. And I was like, this looks so cool. Like, I love just looking at the documents. Like, what cacao is written in this language. And I was really excited to try it. And it was quite interesting, but it wasn't like a wow at the time. And then, so I was really fortunate to kind of experience and taste their cacao at the beginning of their journey. I mean, they'd had this farm for such a long time. And then they invested in a lot to understand the fermentation. And they had Dan from Hawaii go over there and work with them to understand their fermentation, how to improve it and everything. And then, a couple of years later, I was at Chocoa. Oh, actually, I met Kathy in Seattle, and we did like a choc swap. I used to do lots of those,
Right.
where I'd made some chocolate, someone else had made some chocolate, and we would swap. So I tasted, his bar made with that cacao, and he tasted my bar, and, we'd compare our thoughts and everything. And then, a couple of years later, I was at Chocoa and I was tasting Mirzam. Mirzam just turned 5. It feels like they are at least 7. And I met Kathy, and Kathy and I had connected on social media before we met each other in person at Chocoa, and I tasted all their bars. And actually, I think Kathy had sent me some before Chocoa, and my favorite was the India. And I was really excited to hear it's from the same farm where I'd made some chocolate with these beans a few years before. And so I could really taste, all of that work that they'd put into it, and all of that investment in understanding the fermentation, because it tasted totally different, and it was really quite citrusy, and it was spicy, and it was just really interesting. Whereas before it was sort of it wasn't offensive, but there was nothing that made it really stand out.
Sure.
I kind of got a bit of a Marmite taste from it, actually. Or Vegemite. Do you guys have Vegemite? What
No.
do you know what Marmite is?
Vaguely. I know it's some kind of weird yeast
like
spread.
Yeah, it's like a yeast extract. Yeah, it's like a savory thing that you put on toast.
It looks frightening. And watching people, if they put
It's
too
actually
much,
quite nice.
when people put too much, their faces make me a
and
little
it's like,
worried.
basically, it's like 50% salt or something as well. You've got to spread it very thinly. I think, but it's cool. And I've tasted like Marmite brownies and truffles, and if you get the balance right, it really works.
I mean,
I see your eyebrow taking a massive peek.
it's a dramatic eyebrow, and I get intrigued by
It's a
something.
dramatic eyebrow.
Yeah.
This is why we had to look at each other.
Yeah, we almost did this where I didn't have a way of seeing Hazel while we talked. She was still going to see me. Well, maybe, but luckily you can see my weird eyebrow.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious. I want to talk a little bit about this guy.
Yeah.
And when I interviewed you for my podcast, we talked about this.
They're not normally that size.
Are they not usually this big?
No, this is the normal size.
Oh.
I don't know if you can see it, because I know I'm like a square at the moment.
Well, I have one downstairs. I have a normal sized one too. I think it's the same, but this one is fun because it's huge, and it's important for me to pick it up again. So, what when I interviewed you for my podcast years ago, you mentioned that this kind of came about because of your interest and background in art, but certainly there had to be some level of understanding of chocolate and perhaps some science. Like, what were you drawing from to create that? Is it purely synesthesia and a paintbrush? And
No, not at all. No, it unfortunately it's not very technical, because I know you'd like if it was.
I mean, it is
And
what it is.
people expect it to be. People expect it to be very technical, and there are technical, tasting things out there.
Sure.
But for me, I actually did quite a few drafts where it's really hard to put the colours next to each other in different ways. Like, I've tried doing a different version for coffee, but it's like the colours are there just because you can't really have like pink over here and red over here. Pink needs to be next to red, and orange needs to be next to red, and then like yellow needs to be next to orange. So it's more from that standpoint of where the colours are, because I had to put, what I did is I listed out the most common flavours that I found in chocolate, and then I categorised them by colour, and then I looked to see what size that would need to be. And there are like a lot more brown flavors, but I didn't want it to be like half a brown map. So you
So,
know.
yeah, looking at
And I ended up with that shape.
this brown area here, there's quite a bit. And then,
Yeah, and then the other side is not so much, but it looks a little bit like the shape of Africa. And I was originally going to call it the chocolate tasting prompt sheet, which does not sound as sexy.
it uh, it is a bit technical or uh,
The
on the
prompt
nose,
sheet, because that's what it is. Like
right?
you're tasting, and when for me, the colors come to my mind, and I'm thinking, right, that's green. What is it? Is it apple? Is it pistachio? Is it lime? And then I see the words in front of me, and that then prompts me to realize that's what I'm tasting.
Sure. Yeah,
But then when I painted it, it looks like Africa, and I thought map. Oh, map sounds nicer.
good. I'm glad that happened. That's a happy accident.
Yeah,
It is. I like what you're saying there in terms of it provides a prompt, because for me, sometimes when I first got into tasting chocolate, I was thinking that maybe it was totally psychosomatic. If someone told me a flavor, I would taste it. And then one time I was having
that does happen.
I think it can. I was having a Madagascar one time, a few months into being a chocolate dork, and someone said, "Oh, cinnamon," and I was like, "Nope, that one's not in
No.
there." And I was like, "Hey, I'm not purely influenced by suggestion. Whatever level of suggestion or of influence
Yeah.
comes from suggestion, it's not just that." So that was good. So seeing that for me, it's something similar where I go to the color, look for things, but some of it is as much no, it's not that thing, and it kind of pushes me
Yeah.
elsewhere. And then I often find that I'll get flavors that will kind of jump between things that are connected, like a little squiggly line, but they're adjacent. And then there may be something on a totally different part of the map as well. But if I get caramel, toffee is usually close behind, and it wouldn't be unusual to have nutmeg or yeast. And I kind of have a little line that'll do something like that. It's what I've noticed.
Get like a little boat to travel along.
Little Monopoly pieces. Everyone wants the car. The car is the
Yeah.
best. So, with I'm kind of curious, since you've created it, uh, do you still use it? Does it provide the level of benefit to you that it might for someone that didn't make it?
What do you mean by for somebody that didn't make it? Do you mean because I'm the maker, do I use it in a different way than other people?
Well, do you find that it's still, in using it, it's still like a fresh prompt for you, or is it something that you have so ingrained that you don't need it anymore, and you're like, oh, I taste nutmeg and 3-year-old bourbon cask.
I think it is helpful, um, but I do so much teaching of it now that it is very second nature. Like I'm fluent in this language now, but it still helps me. So I did do a lot of chocolate judging this year, where we got sent a batch and then we had to taste them over a month. And so I would have, a coffee break while I was working, and I've got another map above my desk because I didn't have one there, and then I'd be tasting, and then I was taking like another one from somewhere, and I thought, no, I'd sit and taste chocolate all the time. So I've got one in, at my desk on the wall, because when I'm tasting, I can then look at it, and it does still prompt me. But I do so much now of teaching it,
Sure.
because I've been doing these, webinars and things like that I'm more focused on explaining it to others than using. And I notice myself as well, I need to get into the zone. I can't, I could potentially right now just shove a bit of chocolate in my mouth and kind of give you an idea of what flavors are there. But the concept of the painting piece, the painting technique of tasting, obviously you can use the map without painting, You just kind of close your eyes and see what comes to your mind, and then you think, right, for me, I get the green and I go to the green, and then I see what flavors are there. And essentially I created it just as a side note because I did a lot of chocolate tasting with groups of friends, and we would have different tools, and that we did use the flavor wheels that are, there are lots of different ones, and they're usually categorized by kind of food category.
Right.
So it's like fruit, vegetables, spices, whereas I've got red pepper over here and tomato here, and then I've got olive over here. So it's literally just categorizing the flavors by color, and that's what's simple about it. I wanted it to be simple and easy to use. But most people, because I'm a scientist, expect it to be quite technical and difficult. But what I want to promote with it is that it's so easy to use, and you don't need to get a certificate and everything. I want to make craft chocolate more accessible because, I've kind of experimented in various parts of the chain. I've visited makers and I've visited farms and I've experimented making chocolate myself. And I think there are so many experts in all of the supply chain, but everybody will benefit if we have more consumers. So because I'm a people person and everything, I thought that's where I should focus in my free time, is to help people. If you make chocolate tasting more approachable for people, then everybody wins. The more consumers we have. But with the painting piece, it's really like a meditation.
Right.
And we do a warm up. When I've done the painting workshops, I really get in the zone. We talk about what is chocolate, what do flavor notes mean, why do we have flavor notes and everything, and we have kind of a discussion, get people in the zone. And then obviously not everybody does see colors when they taste.
Sure.
It's not a common thing, and I've since learned it's not synesthesia, it's something else called cross-modal correspondence. Again, not as sexy.
It's not, but that makes a lot of sense because
because it's like an association.
Right. It's not you're not tasting the number 7.
It's not kind of we're not tasting like numbers and stuff, and it's cross-modal correspondence because you're associating the color of the food with the flavor. Yeah, because most of them are the colors of the food itself, and the one I normally highlight is that vanilla's an exception.
Right.
And obviously some people might associate different flavors with different colors. So I put licorice as a sort of light brown, because for me, it's not like a harsh, intense flavor like a lot of black flavors are.
Right.
But licorice is that kind of, just light brown comes to my mind because it's almost that kind of dirty taste.
Sure.
Licorice. But some people might put it as black, and that's absolutely fine. The whole idea of this is that it's a concept. Right. So I haven't got every flavor in the world on there. And actually, I've translated it into a few different languages. And as I've done that, I've thought about, obviously the Spanish one's difficult because there's many countries that speak Spanish. But I've tried to think about the flavors that country would appreciate. If I'm translating it, into Brazilian Portuguese, I added cupuaçu and, I took away rhubarb. And I took away Marmite and things that perhaps aren't, as popular. And obviously you guys are more common with like a red grape flavor, whereas for us, like we don't have anything that's flavored red grape. Like we eat red grapes, but we don't have grape flavor or anything. Whereas you guys probably have a stronger association with red grape that you would, you'd want that on there, for example.
And most Americans have never had a currant that they've realized in their lives. So that's sad because currants are tasty, but they're not common in the States. Now, I'm kind of curious because...
so black currant's really British.
Yeah. Right. Something that I personally value in chocolate is being able to go over the whole spectrum of flavors. But I definitely have, my own taste where like what I'm drawn to. And frankly, it's kind of down more this area, like in
Really, you
here.
like brown flavors?
I like dark roasty chocolate. I don't want it to be too roasty. That's
Really?
subjective. Um, I like some bright fruity, like fresh fruit kind of chocolate, but when you roast it a bit more, it brings out more of like a cooked fruit or dried fruit kind of flavor. And that's what I tend to gravitate towards. So a lot of the French companies actually work for me very well. I'm kind of curious, where do you like to? I mean, if you are reaching for a chocolate bar, which obviously it's going to vary from time to time, but where do you often kind of go in terms of on the map and flavor? Are you a dark roasty, brown
No,
flavors?
not at all.
You bright
That's
pink?
what, yeah, that's what I thought was really interesting. That you like dark roast because you don't like coffee. So I thought that was interesting because coffee's generally a kind of the world consumes a large percentage of very darkly roasted coffee,
Right.
um, and I'm very sensitive to dark and over roasted. Sometimes I like it, but generally really like light roast coffee.
Okay.
I need acidity. I can't eat anything if it doesn't have acidity. And there are some cacaos that I appreciate are great quality cacaos, but they're not for me because they lack the fruit and they lack the acidity. And I really need it, and I need it in my coffee as well.
Hmm.
If there's no acidity, it just feels very dull and flat and just kind of earthy for me. So I really like fruity flavors. You're like, yes,
That's the part
so
that I
dull,
love.
delicious.
Well, are you familiar with Francois Pralut's Jakarta?
No, but I probably wouldn't go for it because of like my association with Indonesia. Bars are kind of usually quite like they're smoky. They're not always smoky, but
This one is.
you like that.
Well, this particular bar, you've spent time in the Pacific Northwest around Seattle. I tell people the bar tastes like that area if it was on fire. Because it's
It's an
like
interesting description.
smoky and earthy and like wet wood and moss and leather. And it is not fruity. It's
Yeah.
not bright. It's not, I mean, it does have like a creamy vibe because they add a fair amount of cocoa butter. So it comes across quite creamy.
Hmm.
But it's like really roasty and creamy. And I love it. I mean, I like some bright ones too. I actually have been playing around with the idea of pairing chocolate specifically. Like I've played around with the idea for since before I started the Chocolate Society, getting a really bright Madagascan chocolate next to Pralu's Jakarta, and side by side, they really they don't occupy much of the same space at all, so it really accentuates the other, and it's tasty and fun.
Hmm. That's a very interesting concept, actually. I've not heard of anybody actually doing a chocolate pairing where you're pairing bars.
Yeah, it's
It's
next
always
level.
chocolate and something.
Yeah,
I think you've just come up with a genius concept there.
12 years ago, but sure. It was a long time
No,
ago.
that's really interesting though. Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, those two, those were ones that I actually like I was playing with back in it would have been what 2009. The Pralo Jakarta, and at the time the Amano Madagascar. It would have just come off winning the first American gold award at the Academy of Chocolate, and I think it was maybe a bit. It was more tart then. It was like more sour. So I don't know if it was beans or the bar or what, but it was quite sour, and playing with the burning Northwest Pacific Northwest area, it was a fun combo for me.
I see. This is what I really love about chocolate, and I love about judging, especially when I would judge side by side in a group, is the tasting chocolate will take you somewhere. And I remember, there was one day we were judging chocolate with the Academy, and we were talking about, this bar was taking us on a walk through like an autumnal, like forest morning,
Did you actually
and we're
say
getting
autumnal?
these. Yeah.
Good.
Do you not use that word because you don't have autumn, do you?
Hey, wait a minute. We have autumn in parts of America, including Utah, just not where I grew up.
But you don't use that word.
We say fall. And autumnal,
Yeah.
it sounds pretentious to an American. But so do English accents, but we still love them, so it's all good. Anyway, you're
Yeah.
walking through an autumnal forest with this chocolate.
It's that's what I love about it.
Yeah.
And sometimes the flavors can be so vivid and so random. Like it tasted like the vine of a tomato once. And we were like, has this chocolate been stored in a box with tomato vines? Because it's so vivid, And everybody on the table was like, it's so strong. Like, this is so unusual.
Interesting.
And it could be just something so random that everybody's like, surely this has been stored in a box with tomato vines.
Well,
and I just find that so fun that people will pick these things out, and it will take, I remember this one girl was like, it tastes like an armchair, but like a leather armchair, but like an old man's armchair, not like a new one.
Good. You want the old man flavor of the armchair. I like that.
Yeah. And then she said something like, it tastes like dust that was stuck in the computer. And I'm like, okay.
That's incredibly specific. I like
Yeah.
tasting chocolate with people because it really does. Hearing other people's ideas, it's kind of like your map. Hearing other people's ideas helps guide. And sometimes I disagree. And they'll say something and I'm like, I don't taste that. And I get the reverse of that all the time. And in terms of taste, what's funny is my taste does not reflect the Chocolate Society's taste. There have been so many times when we're tasting something where if I'm not alone, there may be one or two other people that like something with me, and everyone else is wrong. It's crazy.
Is wrong.
Yes, naturally. Can't be that I'm wrong. I started it, so
Maybe because you do have an unusual taste then. You like these kind of smoky, low acid bars,
could be. Now, Om Nom, they used to do a New Guinea that tasted...
Yeah, I tasted it really early on, actually, and it tasted like eating leather.
Well, the last couple batches we had tasted like specifically barbecued pork ribs with like a sweet sauce on there while it was being smoked. And it was
I
weird.
can see why that would be your ideal bar.
Well, the thing is, by itself,
just
it
chuck
wasn't.
that bar on top of like a chunk
brisket?
of meat you just barbecued.
Exactly. Well, the bar itself, I was like, it was kind of weird. It wasn't one that I would just reach for, but there's a particular cheese called Tome de Vache Basque, which has a proper pronunciation that I can't do. But it's like a French Basque sheep's milk cheese. No, cow's milk. That's the Vache part. Cow's milk cheese that, for the Americans watching, which is most of the audience, it tastes like fancy easy cheese. It's like cheese from a can. You squirt out. It tastes like that, but in the best way. It was so good. And that cheese with that barbecue rib chocolate was incredible. And it was so weird because both of them on their own are like, I don't understand what's happening. Why these foods exist? And then you have them together, and it was delicious. You're missing out.
They're back to that pairing thing, isn't it? But
Yeah.
I'm just a little bit traumatized about cheese in a can. I'd kind of removed that from my memory and hoped it didn't exist anymore.
No, America will always exist, Hazel. And where there's America, there's cheese in a can. Because, there's actually places for it. I'm not going to lie. Like when you have a cheesesteak,
I would just love for somebody to do a cheese pairing, like a chocolate cheese pairing, and then just like whip out this can
of
and
Cheese
just
Whiz,
like spray cheese
and like
on some chocolate.
you dip a spatula into your Cheese Whiz and plop it on some bread, and then you put piles of thinly sliced cooked ribeye, and that's a cheesesteak.
Yeah, this is what another. There's so many reasons why I love chocolate, but you know,
Cheese
the
Whiz
fact
is
it
one
can
of them.
go with anything,
Yeah.
even you know, an equivalent of a cheese in a can, as you say. But I guess most of the chocolate society would disagree with you.
Actually, that pairing actually went over pretty well, but it's been a long time. Om hasn't made that bar in a while, so
No, and that was quite an early on bar. That was back in the day when I was hunting for, you know, this new product exhibition. So that was probably like 2012, 2013. And I think they sent me some bars. And
that sounds about right.
yeah, yeah.
Fun
And I was
stuff.
like, wow, this tastes like a shoe. And they were like, yeah, it's because of the smoky beans. But I was still
With
new
barbecue
to
sauce.
chocolate world. Sorry, barbecue shoes.
Yeah, it's barbecue sauce on shoes.
Okay.
But it had like a smoked pork vibe too. I mean, it was
Yes, it was
very
savoury. I
clearly.
remember it being quite savoury, but smokiness sort of automatically makes you think savoury, I think, as well.
Yeah, that's fair. I think there was
Yeah.
a good amount of umami in that bar anyway, but yeah, it was a fun one. It was a fun one to pair with. I like finding weird pairings where at least either the chocolate, which isn't as common to have like a really intensely weird chocolate, more common is an intensely powerful, pungent cheese, and finding a good chocolate with it. Like a while back, there's an English cheese from Quicks. They call it the Devonshire Red Truffle. It's like it's basically a really bright orange traditional English cheddar, as I understand it, and it tastes very
Okay.
horseradishy. And I was
Oh, nice.
determined to find a chocolate that would go with it. And it took some doing, but I eventually found one. Most chocolates just do not work well with horseradish savory cheese, you know. But I eventually found one that did, and I was very excited. And that's when I started following Quick's Cheese on Instagram, and I was so excited when they liked my post because I tagged them, and they're like, "You paired chocolate with that cheese, okay?" And they probably thought, weird American, which that shoe fits well. Well, I think we'll have to do this again because
Yeah,
I don't think either of us have run out of things to say. But in the interest of,
we're both good at talking.
I'm less good at shutting up, but I think there's plenty more we can say, but we'll give people a rest from here. But thank you
Yeah.
so much, and I hope you stick around while I close up the stream, and we'll discuss
Yeah.
future conversations or
Continue.
something. But thank you so much for joining Chocolate Fascination.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, and it's actually been really nice to remember some pre-COVID happy days.
Right? Yeah, we could use more of that. Well, thank you so much. We'll
Yes.
talk to you again soon.
Thank you.
Bye.